Hello and welcome back to the Dusty Codex. The year 1066 is perhaps the most famous date in English history, a year of comets, invasions, and blood. It began with the death of Edward the Confessor and saw the crown pass to Harold Godwinson, the last Saxon king. But by October, Harold lay dead on the hill of Hastings, his army shattered by the Norman cavalry. The victor was Duke William of Normandy, a bastard son who had fought for his survival since childhood. He was a man of immense physical strength and ruthless determination, convinced that God had given him the English throne. But winning the battle did not mean he had won the war, nor the hearts of the people he came to rule. After Hastings, the English did not immediately surrender. The surviving nobility retreated to London, barring the gates against the invader. William, rather than attacking the city directly, embarked on a campaign of terror. He marched his army in a great circle around London, burning villages and slaughtering livestock, to starve the capital into submission. By December, the English will was broken. At Berkhamsted, the remaining Saxon leaders, including the boy king Edgar Atheling, rode out to meet William. In a humiliating scene amidst the winter snow, they submitted to the Conqueror, offering him the crown to save their city from destruction. William accepted their surrender, but he did not trust them. He sent his advance guard into London to construct a fortress, the precursor to the Tower of London, to ensure the citizens would not rise up. He refused to enter the city until his coronation day, set for the holiest day of the year, Christmas. The venue for the coronation was the newly built Westminster Abbey, constructed by the late King Edward. It was a symbol of Saxon piety, and by being crowned there, William hoped to present himself as the legitimate heir of Edward, rather than a foreign conqueror. On Christmas morning, December 25th, 1066, the great and the good of England and Normandy gathered in the Abbey. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. These were men who had been trying to kill each other just weeks before. The air was thick with incense, but underneath, it smelled of fear and sweat. William entered the church surrounded by his most loyal knights. He was taking no chances. Outside the abbey, he had stationed a massive ring of Norman cavalry and infantry, ordered to keep the peace and watch the sullen London crowds gathering in the streets. The service began, conducted by Ealdred, the Archbishop of York. It was a unique ceremony because it had to be performed in two languages. Ealdred spoke in English for the Saxons, and Geoffrey, the Bishop of Coutances, spoke in French for the Normans. This bilingual necessity was meant to be a gesture of inclusion, a sign that William was king of both peoples. However, in the high-stress environment of occupied London, this duality would prove to be the spark that ignited a disaster. At a key moment in the rite, the bishops turned to the congregation. They asked the assembled crowd, first in English, then in French, if they accepted William, Duke of Normandy, as their lawful king. The people inside, perhaps eager to please their new master or perhaps genuinely relieved the war was over, shouted their assent. They cried out, "Yea," and "We," with such volume and enthusiasm that the sound roared through the stone vaults of the abbey. Outside, the Norman guards were on a hair-trigger edge. They were foreigners in a hostile city, outnumbered and terrified of an ambush. When they heard the sudden, roaring thunder of shouting coming from inside the church, they did not understand it was a cheer. They spoke no English. To their ears, the roar sounded like a riot, or worse, a signal for an assassination attempt. They believed the Saxons inside had drawn their daggers and were slaughtering Duke William at the altar. In a moment of catastrophic stupidity and panic, the guards did not run into the church to save their duke. Instead, reasoning they needed to create a distraction or clear the area, they turned on the surrounding crowd and buildings. They set fire to the wooden houses that clustered tight against the abbey walls. In the dry, cold winter air, the thatch roofs caught fire instantly. The flames leaped from house to house, creating a sudden, roaring inferno. Chaos erupted in the streets. The crowd outside, who had been waiting peacefully, found themselves attacked by the king's own guards. They fled in terror, trampling one another to escape the swords and the spreading fire. Inside the abbey, the service was interrupted not by assassins, but by the smell of burning wood and the screams of the dying outside. Smoke began to billow into the church, darkening the candlelight. The congregation panicked, thinking the Normans were attacking them, or that the English rebels were attacking the church. Everyone, Saxon and Norman alike, made a break for the doors. Dignity vanished instantly. The coronation turned into a stampede. Some people fled to save their lives. Others, realizing the law had broken down, began to loot the church in the confusion. Imagine the scene. William had conquered a kingdom. He was the most feared man in Europe. And yet, at the moment of his greatest triumph, he was left standing almost alone in a smoke-filled church, listening to his capital city burn down around him. Historians tell us that for the first and perhaps only time in his life, William the Conqueror was trembling. He wasn't shaking from cold. He was shaking from a sudden, paralyzing realization of how precarious his grip on England really was. If these stories, where history's grandest moments turn into chaotic disasters, are what you seek, I invite you to subscribe to the Dusty Codex. There are many more tales of royal mishaps waiting for you. While the congregation fled, the bishops and a few terrified monks remained at the altar. They refused to abandon the sacred rite. They urged William to continue, to finish it before the roof collapsed or the mob burst in. The ceremony was rushed. There was no majestic music, only the crackle of fire and the roar of the riot. The bishop's hands shook so violently that he spilled the holy oil as he anointed the conqueror's head. William swore the oath to protect the church, govern justly, and forbid rapine. An ironic promise, given that his own soldiers were currently looting London just outside the door. Finally, the crown was placed on his head. He was king. But there was no applause, no cheering crowd, just the empty, smoke-filled nave and the terrified faces of a few priests. When William emerged from the abbey, he stepped into a nightmare. The fire had consumed a large swathe of Westminster. The smoke was thick and choking. His coronation procession was ruined. His guards, realizing their mistake, were now trying desperately to control the fire and the looting, but the damage was done. The English citizens of London looked on with hatred. This riot changed everything. Before this day, there was a chance for reconciliation. The English had submitted. They were willing to give William a chance. But now, on day one of his reign, he had burned their homes. William was reportedly furious. He knew this was a political disaster. He had wanted to be a legitimate successor to Edward, not a tyrant. But his soldiers' lack of discipline had cast him as a villain. From that day on, William never trusted the Londoners, and they never loved him. He retreated to the safety of his fortifications. The relationship between the king and the capital was permanently broken. This event set the tone for the rest of the Norman conquest. It taught William that the English were dangerous and that his own position was fragile. It hardened his heart. The panic at Westminster foreshadowed the harrying of the North 3 years later, where William would systematically burn the entire north of England to quell rebellion. The fire that started by accident in London would be spread on purpose across the country. Orderic Vitalis, a chronicler born shortly after these events, wrote that the English were filled with grief and suspicion. They realized that under the Normans, no one was safe, not even on Christmas Day. Today, coronations are rehearsed to the second. We expect pomp, pageantry, and order. But the most significant coronation in British history was a chaotic, bloody mess. It is a reminder that the transition of power is rarely clean. The Norman dynasty was forged not just in the victory of battle, but in the terror of the occupation. William ruled for another 21 years. He transformed England, built cathedrals, and commissioned the Domesday Book. But he is remembered as the Conqueror, never the Beloved. The Coronation Riot is often left out of the popular retelling of 1066. We prefer the heroic charge of knights to the clumsy panic of guards. But it was this moment, the shouts, the fire, the trembling hand of the bishop, that truly defined the reality of 1066. It was the collision of two worlds that didn't speak the same language. Thank you so much for watching this story of the disastrous Christmas of 1066. If you want to explore more stories about the strange, violent, and forgotten moments of medieval history, please check out the playlist you see on your screen right now. Until next time, stay curious.